If you're in the market for a low-profile, 75% mechanical keyboard, there's good news. Competition is heating up. But depending on your preferences for things like software compatibility, construction quality, and lighting options, the prospects differ. In this video, I want to reflect on my past month using the LoFree Flow, Keychron K3 Pro, and the newly upgraded NuPhy Air75 V2. Before we get into it though, in the interest of full disclosure, I have worked with all of these companies in the past, and both LoFree and NuPhy sent me their keyboards for free, though I did purchase the K3 Pro on my own. That said, as always, none of these companies had any say in the content of this video, so I'll do my best to share my honest perspective on where each keyboard shines and perhaps falls behind. The benefit is that all of these companies are offering discounts for my viewers, which can be found by following my link tree in the video description. Let's get started. In terms of price, the LoFree Flow is the most expensive, coming in at $160, followed by the NuPhy Air75 V2 at $130, then the Keychron K3 Pro, which ranges from $94 to $114, depending on your configuration. Though to be fair, the most comparable version with RGB backlighting and hot swappable sockets is the most expensive. That said, both NuPhy and Keychron charge for shipping, which bumps the prices to within about $13 to $30 of the LoFree Flow. So while price should be a comparison, I think other factors are more likely to influence your decision. In terms of manufacturer configurations, Keychron offers the most variation, allowing you to change things like keycap color, switches, hot swappability, and backlighting, followed by NuPhy, which offers 3 color themes and 7 switches, then LoFree, which only offers the Flow in 2 configurations, black with tactile switches or white with linear. I'm basing my perspective on the black Flow with tactile Kailh switches, the white Air75 V2 with linear NuPhy switches, and the K3 Pro with tactile Gateron V2 switches. And this is the first important distinction to note. While these keyboards all have hot swappable PCBs and 2-pin switches, the Kailh switches used in the LoFree Flow have parallel pins, while the Air75 V2 and K3 Pro use a more common perpendicular pin orientation. So you'll likely have more switch options to choose from when tuning your feel on the Air75 V2 or the K3 Pro. However, I do think that the Kailh switches used in the Flow are the best low-profile switches I've tried to date, likely due to their premium all-palm stem and case construction. That said, greater selection may lead to improvements over time for both NuPhy and Keychron. Either way, all three use cherry-style low-profile stems, with the K3 Pro now offering inline stabilizers, so all should have similar keycap compatibility. Moving up from the switches slightly, we can compare the keycaps. Here there aren't any game-changing distinctions that would override aesthetics, as all three are made with oil-resistant PBT and have a nice 1.4mm thickness. However, I would give NuPhy and Keychron a slight advantage here because their legends are double shot and they offer extra keycaps in the box to allow you to alter the aesthetic slightly and opt for a solely Mac or Windows look. While the Flow's dye-sublimated characters will eventually show wear, and they have opted for dual OS legends, which you may or may not like depending on your setup. The other keycap distinction worth noting is with regard to sculpting. All have a similar square base, lofting up to a rounded edge top surface and varying degrees of concavity. However, the Flow and Air75 V2 have fairly flat surfaces, while the K3 Pro's keys are sculpted to angle away from the user slightly, which I find feels a little funny unless I'm using the keyboard in an elevated position. On the construction side of things, there are a lot of little differences to note. The most impactful one, I think, is the Flow's gasket-mounted system for the PCB. I go into more detail about this in my full review, but LoFree has done an excellent job of constructing a low-profile keyboard that feels like a mechanical keyboard first, including things like side bolts to allow you to get into the keyboard very easily for modifications, and really doing a good job of shaping the keyboard to a unique, somewhat muted sound. The Flow is also the only one with a fully aluminum case design, where the Air75 V2 and the K3 Pro both opt for simpler tray-mounted designs that integrate the plate into the aluminum top case and support it with screw-in standoffs from the ABS base. This results in a stiffer overall construction, though as low-profile keyboards, none of these are going to win any kind of flex awards to begin with. To simply equate the K3 Pro and the Air75 V2 construction would be a mistake though. Keychron opted for a simpler case design with the K3 Pro, which doesn't feature any internal foam or switch pads, and has a very exposed and minimal aesthetic from the sides. Alternatively, NuPhy includes plate foam, switch pads, and underkey spacebar silicone to shape the sound of the keyboard a little more, all of which I think were good choices. The Air75 V2 also just feels a little more premium and well built, much closer to that of the Flow, and I like how the frosted ABS base lets you see some of the PCB backlighting, though this does mean that there isn't any case foam included. The back side of the case also highlights another important distinction, as both the Air75 V2 and the K3 Pro offer integrated kickstand style feet that allow you to increase your typing angle. I actually really appreciate this because I prefer typing at higher angles to begin with, so the Flow's fixed angle, though higher than the default incline of the others, isn't as comfortable for me. Again, I think the construction of the feet on the NuPhy keyboard is better than that of the K3 Pro, just feeling a little firmer and ending with a more definitive snap. It's also worth noting that both these keyboards have arranged their feet strategically to allow you to place them on top of many laptop keyboards without interfering with the underlying keys. Not a feature I use, but you might. Otherwise, they all have fairly unique aesthetics that may or may not speak to you and are fairly similar in size and weight. This is despite that there is some considerable differences in battery size, with the K3 Pro packing a 1550 mAh battery compared to the Flow's 2000 mAh and the massive 4000 mAh battery in the Air75 V2. That said, with how each uniquely deploys LED lighting, you're unlikely to see months between charges, but with all the lights off, you may notice more of a difference. All these keyboards use per-key north-facing LEDs for backlighting. However, the Flow simply offers white backlight, while the Air75 V2 uses RGB, and the K3 Pro lets the user choose this when ordering. Though it's worth noting that if you opt for the white backlight, you don't get hot swappable sockets, which may be an issue. While the Flow's backlight is static and limited to brightness changes, the K3 Pro and Air75 V2 each offer a variety of static and dynamic RGB backlighting effects. Though I think the way that the backlight reflects around the keys makes the effects a little more prominent with the Air75 V2. In addition to backlights, both the Flow and the Air75 V2 offer different takes on side lighting, with the Flow opting for a more understated projection from 3 LEDs on either end of the keyboard that look kind of elegant but aren't particularly visible to the typist, while the Air75 V2 has 2 small LED strips on the top corners of the keyboard, which are more visible and functional. This is important because they're used to convey information to the user, like when the caps lock is enabled, which I find to be very difficult to judge on either the K3 Pro, which simply changes the single key LED color, or the Flow, which illuminates a faint LED beneath a hole in the caps key itself. So, overall, I would say that the NuPhy Air75 V2 is most likely to make a colorful splash in your workspace. The final 2 points worth considering are potentially more divisive. One of the criteria I had when constructing this comparison was wired and wireless connectivity, which is why I chose the K3 Pro instead of Keychron's all-aluminum S1. That said, while all these keyboards support 3-device Bluetooth connections, only the Air75 V2 also allows for 2.4 GHz radio frequency connectivity. On its own, this may not be a big deal, but NuPhy recently upgraded the RF connection with the V2 Air75 so that its polling rate matches that of a wired connection at 1000 Hz. This probably isn't important if you're planning on using the keyboard wired or as a typist, but if you plan on gaming wirelessly, then this alone could be why you choose the Air75 V2 over any other wireless keyboard. The other major distinction that I suspect will push you in one direction or another is QMK and VIA compatibility, which is only available on the K3 Pro and the Air75 V2. The LoFree Flow doesn't offer any degree of key remapping or macros, not even with proprietary software. This is something that was originally only available on the K3 Pro, but again, the new Air75 has adopted the open source QMK and VS standard, abandoning their previously proprietary and rather clunky NuPhy console software. In fact, the Air75 V2 actually has 8 layers ready for customization, which is the most of any keyboard that I own, as the 4 layers available on the K3 Pro are more common. This is probably overkill for most, but definitely worth noting. With that said, here's a back-to-back comparison of how each sounds in their default configuration. I much prefer the unique sound and feel of the LoFree Flow because the kill switches offer a really smooth but prominent tactile response that, when paired with the gasket mounting and internal foam, result in a muted but kind of marbly sound. That's not to say that there's anything wrong with the Air V2, I quite like it as well, especially the silicone-backed spacebar. It's just a much more traditional low-profile keyboard sound and feel. Similarly, the K3 Pro is also nice, however the open construction without any foam sounds a little hollower, and the spacebar in particular has some spring ping that can be quite unpleasant depending on how you strike it. And that's it. Hopefully I was able to point out a few of the important distinctions between these keyboards and help you make up your mind. If there's something I missed that's important to you, please let me know using the comments below. If I were asked by a friend to make a recommendation, what I would say is, if you like the look and sound of the Flow and you don't care about software customization or wireless gaming, that's an excellent feeling keyboard. Otherwise, I would probably lean towards the NuPhy Air75 V2 because I prefer its construction and wireless pulling rate. But if you like the aesthetic of the K3 Pro and don't need a super responsive RF connection, then that's a great keyboard too. But what's your choice? Let me know using the comments below. And otherwise, if you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.